Hey, well, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to The Collision. Daniel here to talk about the new film from Angel Studios, The Sound of Hope, the story of Possum Trot. Hits theaters July 4th. I've seen it, so let's talk about it. So as sort of the parallel titles might imply, The Sound of Hope is sort of like a spiritual follow-up to Angel Studios' 2023 smash hit film, The Sound of Freedom. And a lot like that former film, this film shines a light really on like the vulnerable, the abused, the neglected children in our society, and then challenges audiences with the questions of, what then will you do about this problem? And I'll say right from the start that this is a really good film. I think kind of both as like an inspiring narrative and then also a very like potent call to action. The Sound of Hope is one of the most powerful and like emotionally moving films of the year, and is definitely a story that will stick with you really long after the end credits have rolled. And the movie is based on like a true story of how 22 families from a small church in the small town of Possum Trot felt led by God to adopt, I believe, 77 of kind of the most difficult to place children that were in the foster care system. And it's not necessarily the type of story that's just filled with, big stunning miracles or just breathtaking action. And instead, it's the story of just how a family and a church and a community learn to take their eyes off their own, immediate comforts in order to put love into action, even when doing so was difficult and less than glamorous. And at least to me, I think this film is powerful in large part because of that sort of more focused scope of it, because this just feels like a very intimate and real story that's baptized in just very honest human experiences rather than a bunch of sort of Hollywood tropes and contrivances. And the movie is elevated by just a superb cast, really where like dynamic acting elevates very well developed and compelling characters, because Demetrius Gross, who plays Reverend Martin, and Nika King, who plays Donna Martin, his wife, both delivered just powerhouse performances in this. And kind of despite their characters' their virtues and their very self-sacrificial actions, both characters remain just strikingly human. They're very imperfect. They're frail. They're not immune to just crushing despair or, just nagging doubts about their, ability to navigate these circumstances. And kind of equally excellent in the cast is Diana Babnikova, who plays Terry, who is kind of like a particularly troubled child who's just dealing with this immense trauma from her upbringing. And she demonstrates this tremendous acting range in a very complex and demanding role. And I will say that Sound of Hope might be the most exceptionally acted faith-based film that I have ever seen, or at least seen in some time. And I really do hope that sort of the outward, the faith aspects of this story don't deter the cast from gaining, kind of garnering more mainstream recognition that I think they deserve. And while there are plenty of subtleties and nuances within the story itself, The Sound of Hope is also a very unapologetically kind of message-driven call to action. Because in multiple scenes, Reverend Martin, as he preaches to his congregation, kind of the close-up framing of the camera also serves in a way to sort of direct his sermon towards the audience in the theater as well. And even an end credit kind of title card that declares it's time to fight for the children really leaves no ambiguity about what the filmmakers are hoping to accomplish in this film. And if you guys have followed the channel for very long, you probably know that I am often repelled by the kind of the heavy-handed, fourth wall breaking messaging that has become characteristic of a lot of faith-based storytelling. But at least for me, The Sound of Hope largely avoids those kind of same pitfalls due to the very raw and authenticity of its story and presentation. Because the story in this really is the message, rather than ever feeling like it's merely the pulpit for the filmmakers to preach from. I think also working in its favor is that this film does not sugarcoat its message. This is not a cozy, feel-good family drama or an inspirational pep talk about adoption. The movie very much earns its PG-13 rating by exposing the very uncomfortable severity of the problem that it's addressing, and also not shying away from showcasing the many hardships in store for those like the Martins who strive to be part of that solution. The Sound of Hope does not promise that things will be easy, and neither does the Bible, as Reverend Martin points out at one point in the film, but it does challenge viewers that a genuine faith can't just stand on the sidelines while so many like, vulnerable people are suffering. And kind of in that way, I feel like the emotional victories in this film work, and they do feel like they are earned because the film is so honest about the challenges that had to be overcome to achieve them. And inspirational and kind of emotional movies like this can sometimes be a bit tricky to evaluate because obviously it's a very powerful and moving story. But is it a quality, movie as a work of art, as a film? And obviously the two of those are impossible to like fully disentangle. But really everything about the filmmaking, the construction of this film is competently done, even if no one single element stands out. And I will say, sort of the 2-hour runtime of this does feel perhaps just a little bit too long. You do begin to feel the length of this, particularly because the narrative itself sort of unfolds in somewhat an episodic fashion without always feeling like it has, a very clearly defined forward-moving progression. But even so, like I think the runtime does effectively evoke the weariness of the Martins families, of their struggles, and I think sort of the 2 steps forward, 1 step back kind of plot progression does also remind viewers that hey, life doesn't kind of conform to very neat and tidy Hollywood story arc. So while there are maybe some elements that hey, you can nitpick here or there, I think the filmmaking is a more than suitable vehicle for this powerful story and important message. As far as content to consider, things going on the surface of this, as far as language, I counted 4 to 5 mild profanities, beginning with the letters A and H and B. There's also a girl that is kind of rudely referred to as being a hoe. And the other thing is that there are frequent exclamations of Jesus and Lord Jesus, although they're always used in sincere ways rather than as some sort of blasphemous curse. And there is some violence in this film as well. There's one kind of unsettling scene where a woman is shown being physically abused and ultimately shot with a pistol from her abusive husband. And kind of another moment later on where kind of during a presentation by the foster care agency, some of the people in the audience are shown kind of pictures of the children in the foster care system, and many of them have bruised and swollen faces from experiencing abuse. As far as sexuality, there's one kind of scene where a husband is playfully kissing his wife's legs and trying to be romantic, but very a wholesome romantic relationship for that. But on the other hand, there are kind of several mentions of children who have been pimped out or been raped by various abusive adults in their life. And there's also a scene where a teenage girl kind of goes into a bathroom stall at school with a boy and kind of removes her shirt at his request. And although we see the shirt drop to the floor, she herself is kind of concealed behind the door in that scene, although it is very much implied that they have engaged in some sort of sexual activity. As far as themes, kind of things going on beneath the surface of this film, a lot of the messaging, as I mentioned, is very upfront about what it's trying to communicate. This is a film that is intentionally advocating for just vulnerable children and elevating the importance, the value, the need for adoption. But in many ways, this film also kind of functions as a very blunt challenge towards the church. Obviously, a person doesn't need to be a Christian to be inspired by the message of adoption, but this film almost repeatedly hammers home the point that the church, after all we have experienced, the blessings from God, should be leading the way in that fight. And during one of his sermons, Reverend Martin declares to his congregation, he says, "We have churches on every corner. There shouldn't be a child without a home. We could turn this whole thing around." And really the problem, according to Martin, and I think we can assume kind of vicariously also the filmmakers in this, is not the lack of churches or Christians, but just a reluctance to make sort of the required sacrifices. Kind of midway through this film, Reverend Martin travels from his rural church community into the city to seek kind of financial help from a bigger church. And really kind of after the very grimy, challenging experiences that the characters have had up to that point in the film, seeing this very sleek kind of sanctuary of this mega church where it seems like the most immediate challenges for them are just to get the PowerPoint, the new PowerPoint projector working in time so they can advertise for their big upcoming conference. And it just provides a very stark and almost jarring contrast between sort of those two church approaches. And the visuals and the dialogue of that scene are by no means subtle, and they are perhaps the most on the nose moment in the film's messaging. Although, at least to me, I do think it is significant that kind of director Joshua Wagel casts himself in the role of that church's pastor, and kind of in a way like includes himself among the people that this film seems to kind of most strongly challenge to step up. And probably the scene that best encapsulates what I think is sort of the main emphasis of this film is there's a scene where kind of following a presentation by the foster care agency about these needy children, one of the characters confesses that like, after all that she has seen in that presentation, she can't kind of allow herself to simply provide moral support for others from the sidelines, but that she too must act, kind of leave the sidelines to join the fight for children. And I think that's probably the clearest reflection of what I think this film hopes to accomplish, that it's not enough just for audiences to merely feel uplifted by watching a very inspirational story of, the events at Possum Trot from the comfort of a movie theater, but that we too must kind of step up and join the fight and mission. Overall, this movie kind of took me by surprise. I have enjoyed most of the films that have come out of Angel Studios, so maybe I shouldn't be surprised. But there's just something about like the plot synopsis of this movie that just struck me a little bit more as like a very powerful church Sunday morning testimony rather than like a work of gripping cinematic storytelling. But I think the real life events of the Possum Trot community are an incredible story that is worth telling. And in The Sound of Hope, it is a story that is well told. I think, hey, as someone that reviews a lot of movies, there are plenty of movies that entertain us. I think there are many that even like stir us emotionally, but I think it is a rare and beautiful thing when like a cinematic experience genuinely feels like it changes you. And I do think The Sound of Hope may well be one of those special films. But hey, I would love to hear what you think. If you go check out this movie when it releases, don't be shy, jump into the comment section. Let's have a conversation about this. If you have done so too, I encourage you guys, subscribe to our channel, become a collider, lots of movie reviews and a podcast and interviews and just other fun stuff. Would love to have you be a part of that. But most of all, guys, thank you for watching. Stay safe and continue to collide with your world for Christ.